The house had fallen into a kind of silence that no longer felt peaceful. Claire stood at the window, her fingers pressed against the cold glass, watching the streetlight flicker on and off outside. The neighborhood was asleep, but she was wide awake, her mind refusing to rest. Nights had become her battleground. She drew in a shaky breath. Somewhere inside her chest, fear had carved a permanent space, as though she carried it like a second heartbeat. Years ago, she would have called these moments insomnia, the restless hours of a worried wife. But now she knew better. This was not restlessness. This was dread. Her reflection stared back from the window pane, pale skin, hollowed eyes, lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. The woman she saw no longer resembled the bride she once was. That version of her had believed in promises, in security, in the warmth of belonging. Now she only believed in the heaviness of secrets, in the weight of betrayal that lingered unspoken. Claire whispered into the silence, barely audible even to herself. "Why can't I leave?" The words vanished into the air, swallowed by the emptiness of the room. She had asked herself the same question countless times. There were moments when she thought she might walk away, gather her things, disappear. But then there were the other moments. His smile, the way he brushed her hair from her face, the carefully crafted tenderness that felt both genuine and rehearsed. It was enough to keep her rooted in place, unsure of what was real and what was manipulation. Behind her, the clock ticked with mechanical precision, each second reminding her how long she had endured this quiet unraveling. A sound creaked in the hallway. She turned abruptly, heart hammering. Nothing, just the old house settling, its bones shifting in the dark. Still, her pulse didn't slow right away. Claire pressed her forehead against the glass. The coolness steadied her, but the thoughts circling her mind refused to ease. She had begun to notice things. The faint scent of perfume that wasn't hers. The unexplained absences. The sharpness in his tone that used to be soft. None of it added up, and yet it all did. She closed her eyes. Something is coming, she thought. She didn't know when or how, but the certainty of it pressed down on her like the silence of the night itself. Outside, the flickering streetlight finally steadied, casting a weak glow across the driveway. In that glow, Claire caught her breath. His car was pulling in earlier than expected. And just like that, the silence broke. The front door opened with a soft click, and Claire's body tensed before she forced her shoulders down. She turned just as Daniel stepped inside, his smile already in place as if it had been waiting on his lips for her. "Still awake?" he asked lightly, brushing snowflakes from his coat. His tone was warm, practiced. Claire nodded. "Couldn't sleep." Daniel crossed the room, leaned down, and kissed her forehead. His cologne was sharp tonight, too sharp, and it stung in her throat. He set his briefcase by the sofa with casual ease, a picture of the dutiful husband returning home. But behind that smile, Claire caught a flicker, something colder, something that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Narration carried her thoughts in silence. He's too careful, she realized. Every touch, every look calculated to remind her of the man she had once fallen in love with. Yet beneath the polish, the foundation of their marriage felt fractured, hollow. They sat for a moment on the couch. Daniel's hand found hers, warm and steady, but she felt the weight of it like a chain. "You've been quiet lately," he murmured, watching her too closely. Claire forced a small smile. "Just tired." He nodded, seemingly satisfied, before turning his attention to the muted television. The glow lit his profile, and she studied the sharpness of his jaw, the calm confidence in his posture. To anyone else, he was enviable, a man of stability, charm, and loyalty. To her, he was a stranger she still called husband. When Daniel disappeared into the shower, Claire moved quickly. From the side table drawer, she pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. Her pen scratched across the page, each word deliberate. She didn't write about her day. She wrote about his late arrivals, his changing moods, the unease that lingered after his touches. It wasn't a diary. It was evidence the water shut off upstairs. Claire closed the notebook, slipped it beneath a stack of magazines, and steadied her breathing. She told herself this was only precaution, but deep inside, she knew it was preparation. For what, she wasn't yet ready to admit. Daniel returned, hair damp, smile in place once more. "You should try to rest," he said gently. Claire nodded. But her hand lingered on the notebook hidden beneath the magazines. Tomorrow, someone else might notice the cracks in the frame. The next morning, Claire wrapped her cardigan tighter around her arms before stepping into the cafe. The air smelled of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon, but her chest carried a different weight, one she couldn't shake. She spotted Emily by the window, waving with that familiar brightness that had once felt like sunlight. "Claire!" Emily stood to hug her, eyes crinkling with warmth. But as her arms closed around her friend, she stiffened. When she pulled back, her gaze darted down. Claire followed her line of sight too late. The edge of her sleeve had slipped back, revealing a faint bruise blooming along her wrist. "Claire, what happened?" Emily's voice was soft, but the question cut like glass. Claire tugged her sleeve down quickly. "Nothing. Just clumsy. Hit the counter last night," Emily frowned. "That doesn't look like a counter." Claire forced a laugh, brittle and unconvincing. "You always worry too much." Narration filled the silence between them. She hated lying to Emily, but what could she say? That her marriage had become a stage where she played the dutiful wife and Daniel the perfect husband, while the truth rotted underneath? That she had begun keeping notes not of her love, but of her survival? Emily reached across the table, fingers brushing Claire's hand. "If something's wrong, you can tell me. You know that, don't you?" Claire swallowed hard. Her eyes burned, but she blinked quickly, disguising it with a sip of coffee. "I'm fine, really, just tired." The look Emily gave her said she didn't believe a word. And Claire knew it. Her friend's instincts were sharp. Always had been. The conversation stumbled forward after that. Surface-level chatter about work and weather, but the tension hung between them like fog. Claire smiled when required, laughed in the right places, but her thoughts drifted back to Daniel's smile the night before, the way it had both soothed and unsettled her. As they stood to leave, Emily hugged her again, tighter this time, as if to anchor her. "Claire, if you ever need me, day or night, call." Claire nodded, her voice steady though her chest trembled. "I will," but as she walked home, she knew she wouldn't. Not yet. Back in her kitchen, she slid her sleeve up, staring at the bruise. With a trembling hand, she opened her notebook and wrote a single line beneath last night's entry. Emily noticed. The pen hovered before she added, almost against her will, "I think he knows I'm watching him." The phone rang in the distance, Daniel's number flashing across the screen. The phone rang again that night. Claire stirred in bed, her eyes opening to the soft vibration against the nightstand. Daniel's breathing beside her was steady, almost too steady. He didn't move. The glow of the screen illuminated his face, calm, composed, as though asleep. Claire reached over, not to answer, just to see. The name flashing across the screen wasn't one she recognized. A single initial. Buddy, her pulse quickened. She waited, holding her breath, but Daniel stirred only after the call ended. He rolled over, murmured something incoherent, and turned his back to her. Narration filled the silence. He's hiding something. He's careful, but not careful enough. Who was Elle? Why only at night? The next evening she heard him again. This time she stayed in the hallway, pressed against the wall, listening. His voice was low, hushed, carrying tones she hadn't heard in years. Gentle, intimate, filled with warmth reserved for someone else. "Yes, I'll see you soon." "Don't worry. She doesn't know." The words sliced through her, colder than any silence. Claire's hand trembled against the wall. The hallway stretched like a tunnel, dark and endless. Her breath caught between fear and rage. Daniel's footsteps shifted closer, and she darted back into the bedroom, slipping beneath the covers. When he entered, phone tucked into his pocket, that practiced smile returned. "You're still awake?" he asked softly, sliding into bed beside her. She forced her voice to stay calm. Couldn't sleep, his arm draped over her, heavy, claiming. To anyone else, it would seem tender. To her, it was suffocation. When his breathing deepened into sleep, Claire slipped from the bed. She padded across the floor, silent as shadow, and retrieved the notebook from beneath the magazines. Her pen carved sharp letters onto the page. "He's calling someone. Elle says I don't know." "But I do." The ink smudged where her hand shook. She stared at the words, then closed the notebook as though it were evidence that could betray her if left open. From the corner of the room, Daniel stirred faintly, his voice murmuring a dream or a lie. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. Claire slid the notebook away, her heart hammering. Tomorrow she knew the gaslight would burn brighter. Morning light filtered weakly through the curtains, but Claire's world felt darker than the night before. She sat at the kitchen table, fingers curled around a mug of coffee gone cold. Daniel entered, freshly pressed shirt, tie knotted perfectly, that smile on his lips as if nothing existed outside its charm. "Rough night?" he asked casually, pouring himself orange juice. His tone was light, but his eyes lingered on her longer than usual. Claire gave a stiff nod. "I couldn't sleep." He sat across from her, folding his hands. The air shifted, heavy, deliberate. "Claire," he began softly, "I noticed you've been uneasy lately, jumping at shadows, looking at me like I'm a stranger. What's going on in that head of yours?" Her chest tightened. She searched for words, but hesitation betrayed her. I hear you on the phone at night." Daniel tilted his head, an expression of feigned surprise painting his face. "On the phone? At night? Claire, I think you've been dreaming again. You always dream so vividly." Her mouth opened, then closed. She knew what she had heard, but his calmness made her feel suddenly unstable. "You even wrote something down, didn't you?" His voice sharpened, eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. Claire froze. The notebook. Had he found it? Daniel reached across the table, laying his hand over hers. His touch was gentle, but his grip firm enough to feel like possession. "I worry about you. You're always tired, anxious. You've convinced yourself of things that aren't there. I've seen it before, remember? After your mother died, you thought people were whispering about you. You're fragile, Claire. You can't keep doing this to yourself." The words were soft, almost tender, but each landed like a knife. He wasn't just denying her fears. He was rewriting them, turning her certainty into delusion. "I'm not imagining it," she whispered, though the conviction in her voice faltered. Daniel smiled then, the glow of gaslight burning bright in his expression. "I love you, Claire. You think I'd ever betray that? You're the only woman I've ever wanted. If I take a call late at night, it's work, always work. You know how demanding my job is." She tried to breathe through the fog he created, but the walls seemed to close in tighter. Am I losing my mind, or is he making me believe I am? Daniel leaned closer, pressing a kiss against her temple. "Promise me you won't let these thoughts poison us. Promise me you'll trust me." Claire's lips trembled. "I promise." The lie left her mouth, but it didn't soothe her. Daniel stood smoothing his tie, satisfied. "Good. That's my girl." As the door shut behind him, Claire remained at the table, trembling. She reached for the hidden notebook, flipping to a blank page. Her pen scratched across it in desperate strokes. He knows. He's twisting everything. But I can't stop now. Upstairs, the faint vibration of his forgotten phone echoed. Another message waiting. The phone had been left on the counter, buzzing faintly against the granite. Claire stared at it, her pulse quickening with each vibration. Another message. Another secret. She didn't dare unlock it. He'd notice. Instead, she opened her notebook, filling the page with numbers and phrases that only she would understand. Coded entries, dates, times, initials, a private language of survival. Narration pressed into the silence. If he is lying, I need proof. If he is dangerous, I need protection. And if something happens to me, someone has to know the truth. That evening, when Daniel retreated to his office, Claire placed her phone face down on the hallway table, recording. She adjusted it quickly, angling the microphone toward the closed door. From inside, Daniel's voice carried in fragments. "Yes, no, she suspects something. I'll handle it. She won't leave." Claire's throat constricted. The words weren't clear enough to accuse, but sharp enough to terrify. She snatched the phone back the moment his chair scraped against the floor, slipping it into her pocket just as he emerged. Daniel smiled, brushing her shoulder. "Everything all right?" Her own smile wavered but held. "Of course." Later, in the bedroom, she slipped her pen into her notebook and wrote, "Recording 1. He said I won't leave." Why? Who is he talking to? She stared at the ink, pressing the tip harder until the page nearly tore. Days blurred into one another. Each night she waited until his voice drifted through closed doors or hushed phone calls, and each night she captured fragments. Sometimes a name, sometimes laughter. Always words meant for someone else. Her notebook filled with jagged sentences and hidden codes. It wasn't enough to free her, but it was enough to remind her she wasn't losing her mind. She wasn't imagining this. But paranoia became her constant companion. She jumped when the floor creaked, flinched when Daniel's hand lingered too long on her arm. Each time he leaned close and whispered reassurances, she wondered if he could hear the frantic pounding of her heart, if he knew what she was doing. Claire pressed the notebook closed one night, listening to the steady hum of the refrigerator, the house breathing around her. She whispered into the darkness, "If something happens to me, someone will know." From upstairs, Daniel's voice rose suddenly, sharp with anger. On another call. The recordings weren't just secrets anymore. They were warnings. The evening air felt too still, as if the house itself anticipated what was coming. Claire moved slowly through the kitchen, laying silverware on the table with deliberate care. Every fork, every plate, every glass seemed to carry weight. She had prepared chicken with rosemary, his favorite, but the scent turned her stomach. Narration filled her silence. If this is the last time I sit across from him, I want to remember every detail. The way the knife gleams, the way he chews, the way his smile hides the truth I've already written down. Daniel entered with the same polished charm, tie loosened, hair neatly combed back. He kissed her cheek with exaggerated tenderness. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble," he said, pulling out a chair. His hand lingered on her waist a moment too long. Claire forced a smile. "It's nothing, just dinner." They ate under the dim light, shadows stretching across the walls. The scraping of utensils against porcelain echoed louder than their conversation. Daniel complimented the seasoning, poured her a glass of wine, his eyes watching her too closely. "You've been different lately," he said between bites. "Distracted. It worries me." Claire set her fork down. "I'm fine. Just tired." Daniel's smile spread, but his eyes didn't soften. "You say that too often." He reached across the table, brushing his thumb along her knuckles. To anyone else, it might have seemed loving. To Claire, it was a performance. She nodded, taking a sip of wine to mask the tremor in her hands. Recordings, notes, evidence, she reminded herself. But none of it would matter if she didn't survive tonight. The meal dragged on. Daniel told a story about work, laughing at his own joke. Claire's responses were automatic. Small laughs, nods, murmured words. Inside, she was bracing for impact. When the plates were cleared, he stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You know I love you," he whispered against her ear. "Even when you doubt me." She froze. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Do I?" For the briefest second, the mask slipped. His grip tightened, his jaw clenched, and the warmth in his voice vanished. "Yes, you do." Claire's breath hitched. She pulled away, retreating to the sink, her hands trembling as she rinsed a plate that was already clean. Later, as darkness deepened, the neighbors heard it, the shouting. His voice sharp, commanding, hers desperate, breaking. "Daniel, please. You don't understand." The sounds rose and fell like waves crashing against the walls. A slam, a cry, silence, then another crash. Curtains trembled from the force of it, and then nothing. The street outside returned to its quiet rhythm. A dog barked, a car passed. The night resumed as though nothing inside that house had changed, but Claire was not seen alive again. The following morning, the blinds remained drawn, the driveway empty. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. Only later would the absence become undeniable. Upstairs, in the stillness of the master bedroom, the faint red light of a recorder blinked once before dying. 2 days passed before Emily made the call. Claire hadn't answered texts, hadn't shown up at the cafe, hadn't returned her voicemails. It wasn't like her. Something inside Emily nodded with dread. And when the police finally knocked on Daniel's door, she was already waiting outside, arms folded, face pale. Daniel greeted them with weary eyes, and a voice tinged with just the right amount of concern. Claire's been distant lately, he said, sighing. I thought maybe she just needed space. I didn't think she'd disappear. The officers searched the house with methodical precision. Each room was neat, almost staged as though waiting for a camera crew. Still, unease lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. It was Emily who insisted they check Claire's personal things. She never went anywhere without her bag. If she left, she'd have taken it. In the bedroom closet, tucked beneath a stack of winter scarves, they found it, a small leather notebook, and next to it a slim digital recorder. Claire's handwriting crawled across the cover of the notebook, initials marking dates in a coded rhythm. One officer pressed play on the recorder. Static filled the room. Then Claire's trembling voice emerged, fragile but steady enough to cut through the silence. If you're hearing this, it means I was right. Daniel is lying to me. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending. Sometimes he looks at me like I'm nothing. Sometimes he looks at me like I'm a possession he'll never let go of. I've written everything down just in case. Emily's breath caught, tears rushing to her eyes. She turned sharply toward Daniel, who stood frozen in the doorway. His expression flickered. Grief, then anger, then a careful mask of shock. That's not real, he stammered, voice cracking at just the right pitch. She must have been confused. She wasn't well. You have to understand, Claire had her struggles. But the officers weren't convinced. They exchanged quick glances, then carefully bagged the recorder and notebook. Claire's words had shifted the balance. Narration carried the weight of the moment. The truth had spoken, even in her absence. Claire's fear had been given a voice, and now it would not be silenced. As Daniel continued to protest, Emily's gaze hardened. She remembered the bruise on Claire's arm, the hesitation in her voice, the way she always said, "I'm fine," but never looked it. Everything aligned now, every red flag she had ignored. Outside, the flashing red and blue lights painted the neighborhood in urgency. Neighbors gathered at windows, murmuring among themselves. Inside, the recorder clicked off. The silence almost unbearable after Claire's final words. For the first time, the narrative no longer belonged to Daniel. It belonged to her, and the performance of a grieving husband was about to be tested. Daniel stood at the doorway, framed by the flashing lights, his expression carefully sculpted for the audience outside. Reporters had gathered, microphones extended, cameras glowing like watchful eyes. He ran a hand across his face, pausing just long enough for the gesture to look exhausted, and let his voice break on command. "My wife, Claire, she's everything to me," he said, eyes glistening with tears that never quite fell. "If anyone knows where she is, please bring her home. I can't live without her." His voice cracked at the perfect moment, drawing murmurs of sympathy. To neighbors, he looked like a man shattered. To Emily, standing just beyond the cameras, it looked like theater. She caught the brief pause before he spoke, the way his jaw tensed as if he were calculating every word. Inside, detectives watched more closely. They had already reviewed the recorder and notebook, already heard Claire's trembling voice describing fear that didn't match the man now sobbing into microphones. The contrast was glaring. Later, back inside the house, Daniel continued his act for the officers. He pointed to wedding photos on the wall, lingered on one of Claire smiling in a summer dress. "That's how I want to remember her," he whispered, voice thick. But then came the cracks. Asked about Claire's recent moods, he insisted she'd been happy, content. Yet his phrasing shifted each time. Sometimes peaceful, sometimes hopeful, sometimes excited about the future. None of it matched her recorded words. Detective Harris scribbled notes, his eyes never leaving Daniel. "And you didn't notice her keeping journals? Writing things down?" Daniel shook his head too quickly. "No, Claire never did that. She wasn't the type," Emily's breath caught. She knew Claire was that type. Daniel had lived with her for years. How could he forget? Unless forgetting wasn't the truth at all. The room grew heavier, every detail of Daniel's performance measured against Claire's final words. His smile wavered when the questions grew sharper. His hands fidgeted when silence lingered too long. Narration deepened the shift. For years, Daniel had rehearsed the role of the perfect husband. But now, every line he spoke revealed the cracks beneath. The stage was collapsing, and the detectives were ready to turn the script against him. The diary sat on the evidence table, its leather cover worn soft by years of handling. Detectives Harris and Miller leaned over it, the pages spread beneath the harsh glow of the station's overhead light. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, but punctuated with frantic strokes in places, as though the pen itself had trembled with each word. Miller flipped through the first pages, frowning. Dates, initials, codes, looks like nonsense. Harris shook his head. No, it's not nonsense. She was documenting something. Look here. Same letter appears over and over beside late hours. Claire's coded system slowly began to unravel under their scrutiny. Letters represented names. Louis appeared repeatedly, scrawled beside phrases like phone at midnight or perfume not mine. Numbers marked dates of arguments, sudden absences, unexplained bruises. Each page formed a hidden ledger of betrayal and fear. Emily, invited to the station to review the diary, sat trembling as the detectives read aloud. He smiled at me tonight, but it felt rehearsed. He knows I doubt him. I think he enjoys making me question myself. Her hand went to her mouth. She told me she was fine. She was never fine. Further entries painted a pattern, one impossible to dismiss. March 14th, another call. He said she doesn't know, but I do. June 2nd, he said my memory is failing. Am I losing my mind? Or is he making me believe I am? September 10th, I'm scared of what happens if I confront him, but I'm more scared of what happens if I don't. The words grew darker as the months passed, her suspicions sharpening into certainty. Then came the final entries, hurried and jagged. He watches me too closely now. If something happens to me, this book is proof. Silence filled the room when Harris closed the diary. This isn't just paranoia, he said. This is a timeline, a pattern. She was documenting years of manipulation, and she knew he might try to erase her voice. Daniel's earlier performance, his calculated tears, his shifting stories, now clashed violently against the portrait painted in Claire's words. The devoted husband he projected to the world was dismantled page by page, replaced by a man of deception, control, and betrayal. Emily whispered, almost to herself. She left us the truth. She left us everything. Harris nodded grimly. And now it's time to confront him with it. Narration lingered as the diary was sealed back into its evidence bag. For years, Daniel had hidden behind the smile of a loving husband. But Claire had stripped away the mask with ink and fear, her final act of defiance. Her words had become her justice, and Daniel's biggest lie was about to shatter. The interrogation room was small, sterile, humming with the low buzz of fluorescent lights. Daniel sat at the table, posture straight, hands clasped tightly in front of him. His tie was gone, his hair slightly disheveled, yet he still tried to wear composure like a second skin. Detective Harris slid the diary across the table. Claire wrote this. Years of entries. Every lie, every bruise, every phone call. You want to tell me again she was imagining things? Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't touch the diary. She was fragile. You can twist anyone's words if you want to. Miller pressed play on the recorder. Claire's voice filled the room, shaking but deliberate. If you're hearing this, it means I was right. Daniel is lying to me. The words lingered, unrelenting. Daniel's carefully arranged mask faltered. His breath caught. His eyes flickered downward. Daniel, Harris continued, we've traced financial transfers. Accounts in your name. Money siphoned off steadily for over a year. Enough to disappear comfortably. Enough to start a new life. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. And we spoke with her, Miller added, sliding a photo onto the table. An unfamiliar woman, smiling, carefree. Lena, the one you called late at night. The one you promised she doesn't know. For a moment, Daniel sat perfectly still, as though the world had narrowed to the weight of those items. The diary, the recording, the photo. Then his hand twitched and his composure cracked wide open. You don't understand, he snapped, voice rising, sharp and raw. Claire was suffocating me. She was obsessed. Always watching, always doubting. I couldn't breathe in that house. Obsessed? Harris leaned forward. Or did she finally see you for what you are? Daniel slammed his fist against the table, the sound reverberating through the room. I never meant for it to go this far. Silence followed, heavy and damning. His breathing grew ragged, his hands shaking as the performance collapsed entirely. Narration cut through the stillness. For years, Daniel had spun lies like silk. weaving himself into the image of a loyal husband. But truth is relentless. It claws through masks, shatters illusions, and exposes the rot beneath. Miller's voice was quiet but steady. You were leaving her. The affair, the money, it was all preparation. But you underestimated her. She left us the truth before you could erase it. Daniel's eyes glistened, not with grief but fury. She was mine. She had no right. He stopped himself, but it was too late. The words hung in the air like smoke. The detectives exchanged a glance. The performance was over. The lie had shattered. Daniel slumped back in his chair, the fight drained from him, only fragments of rage flickering in his eyes. And as the recorder clicked off, the last remnants of his carefully constructed world collapsed with it. The jail cell was quiet, except for the metallic echo of footsteps in the hallway. Daniel sat on the narrow cot, elbows on his knees, head bowed. His hands trembled, no longer clasped in false composure but dangling loosely, stripped of control. In the corner of the room, a recorder clicked on. The detectives had left it playing, the very same one they had pulled from Claire's belongings. Her voice, fragile yet steady, filled the space. If you're hearing this, it means I was right. Daniel is lying to me. Sometimes I think he wants me to believe I'm crazy. But I'm not. I know what I've seen, what I've heard. If I don't survive this, please don't let him write the ending. Daniel pressed his palms against his ears, but it didn't stop her words. They lived inside him now, every syllable a nail driven into the coffin of his carefully crafted life. Narration carried the truth. He had tried to erase her voice, but instead it had become the one thing he could never silence. Her final words had destroyed him more completely than any courtroom ever could. Across town, Emily stood in Claire's kitchen, the notebook pressed to her chest. The house still carried Claire's presence in its quiet details. A half-burned candle on the counter, a scarf draped over the chair. Emily's tears blurred the ink as she whispered, "You weren't alone, Claire. Not anymore. They heard you." She opened the diary one last time, her fingers tracing the final entry. "If something happens to me, this is proof." Emily closed the book, clutching it tightly. "You found your voice," she murmured, voice breaking but resolute. And it was stronger than him. At the precinct, Detective Harris filed the evidence, his face grim but softened by the weight of justice served. "Her words built the case," he told Miller quietly. "Not ours, hers. She left a map and we just followed it." Back in his cell, Daniel rocked forward, muttering, fragments of denial tangled with fury. "She ruined me, she ruined everything." But even his own voice sounded hollow now, drowned out by Claire's steady tone echoing from the recorder. The night deepened outside, shadows stretching across empty streets. In the silence, the world seemed to carry her final message. Betrayal had stolen her life, but truth had ensured she would not vanish into nothingness. Claire's story was no longer his to twist. It belonged to her, to Emily, to the diary she left behind, and to the justice she carved with ink and fear. Daniel raised his head, eyes bloodshot, his face pale beneath the flickering light. The recorder clicked once more, Claire's voice repeating her plea. Please don't let him write the ending. And now it was clear. He never would. The silence that followed was hers. Forever.